Marcus Washington sped down the road leading to his mansion in Atlanta, eager to surprise his father Samuel after 3 weeks of business trips in Asia. The torrential rain made driving difficult, but nothing could dampen his excitement at embracing the 78-year-old man who had raised him alone since he was 6 years old. He turned onto the private driveway, and what he saw completely paralyzed him. His father was in a wheelchair in the side garden, completely soaked, shivering with cold as he cried silently in the storm. No sign of his wife Victoria, no lights in the house. He jumped out of the car without turning off the engine and ran toward him, slipping on the wet grass. Samuel threw himself into his arms, shivering with cold and fear, sobbing that Victoria had left 3 days earlier, leaving him outside with the excuse that he had gotten dirty and deserved to stay out in the cold until he learned to behave. As he held his frozen father in his arms, Marcus realized that the nightmare was just beginning. On Samuel's phone was a video that Victoria had recorded before disappearing, and what she said in that message would destroy all his certainties about the family he believed he had. The September storm raged violently over the elegant suburbs of Atlanta as Marcus Washington made his way to his estate. 3 weeks in Japan to close the $200 million acquisition that would consolidate his technology empire. But now he just wanted to see his father Samuel, the man who had sacrificed everything to raise him after his mother's death in a car accident. During the flight back from Tokyo, Marcus had spent hours thinking about the surprise he would prepare for Samuel. He had bought a vintage Japanese watch that he knew his father would love. Samuel had always been fascinated by precision mechanics since his days as a technician. Marcus had planned to arrive on Wednesday, but decided to take an earlier flight to spend more time with the man who had given up everything to raise him. He'll be so happy, Marcus thought, smiling as he imagined Samuel's expression when he saw the carefully wrapped gift on the passenger seat. In recent months, Samuel's phone calls had sounded different, more fragile, more dependent. Marcus had attributed this to the natural progression of Parkinson's, but now a strange feeling bothered him. Samuel Washington, 78, had been his inspiration. A former mechanic who had worked 3 jobs to pay for his son's education, he now depended on a wheelchair due to Parkinson's disease diagnosed 5 years earlier. Marcus remembered Samuel's strong hands teaching him how to fix cars in the backyard of the modest house where they grew up, the same hands that now trembled uncontrollably. The decision to hire Victoria as a private nurse 2 years earlier had seemed perfect. She appeared to be everything Samuel needed, patient, caring, and with impeccable credentials from Emory University. When she and Samuel got married 18 months later, Marcus had felt relieved. Finally, his father would have someone dedicated exclusively to his well-being. "She's an angel," Samuel used to say in the first few weeks. "She takes care of me like his own mother would." Those words now echoed bitterly in Marcus's mind. The automatic gate opened, recognizing his Tesla, but something in the familiar landscape immediately unsettled him. The house looked dead. No lights in the windows, no sign of life. It was impossible. Victoria knew of his return, though she had decided to arrive 2 days early to surprise Samuel. Additional Scene 3, Marcus noticed other disturbing details as he approached the house. The garden, normally immaculate, showed signs of neglect. Newspapers piled up at the front entrance, wilted flowers in the planters that Samuel loved to watch from the window. Even stranger, Victoria's car was not in the garage, but her keys were still on the hook by the entrance. The silence was deafening. Where was the classical music Victoria always played to calm Samuel? Where were the normal sounds of a lived-in house? Then he saw him, a frail figure in a wheelchair in the side garden, completely exposed to the fury of the elements. His heart stopped when he recognized Samuel's blue pajamas, now soaked and muddy. His father was shaking like a leaf in the wind, his thin face ravaged by crying and confusion, his gray hair plastered to his forehead by the torrential rain. Marcus abandoned the car with the engine running and ran toward him, his $5,000 suit instantly soaked. Samuel lifted his tear-ravaged face and leaned toward his son with the desperation of someone who no longer expected to be saved. His body was cold as marble, his clothes completely soaked, his lips purple with cold. "Dad, my God, what happened?" Marcus shouted, immediately taking off his jacket to cover Samuel. "Where's Victoria? How long have you been out here?" Samuel tried to speak, but only sobs came out. His trembling hands grabbed Marcus's arm with desperate force, as if he feared his son might also disappear. Marcus noticed that Samuel had lost weight dramatically, his wrists were skeletal, his face more sunken than he remembered. "3 days, Samuel finally managed to whisper. "She said She said I was bad. That I deserved to stay here until I learned my lesson. The story that emerged between sobs was a nightmare. Victoria had disappeared 3 days earlier after putting Samuel in the garden and locking the house. She had left him there with orders not to move, to wait under the tree as punishment for getting dirty. During lunch. But Samuel couldn't even remember what he had done wrong. His illness sometimes confused his memory. Carmen, the trusted housekeeper, had been fired a week earlier with a made-up excuse. Samuel had spent 3 nights in the open, drinking rainwater when his thirst became unbearable, trying to find shelter under the leaves of the tree when the cold intensified. The nearest neighbors were too far away to hear his muffled calls over the high fence that surrounded the property. "I tried to scream for help, son," Samuel whispered between shivers. "I screamed until I lost my voice. I saw cars passing by on the street, but no one could hear me because of the fence. I thought I was going to die here alone." Marcus felt anger rising like volcanic lava. The privacy fence he had installed to protect Samuel had now turned out to be a prison that had almost cost him his life. As he carried his father's frail body toward the house, Marcus made a mental inventory of his visible injuries: bruises on his arms where Samuel had tried to protect himself from the rain, rashes from being wet for days, clear signs of dehydration. Marcus walked around the house and found all the entrances locked. A kitchen window had broken glass on the inside, a sign that someone had forced their way out. He managed to get in, cutting his hand on the remaining shards, to discover an interior devastated by chaos. Furniture was overturned, drawers emptied, clothes scattered everywhere, as if after an earthquake. The master bedroom had been completely emptied. All of Victoria's clothes, her jewelry, and her expensive suitcases were missing. In Samuel's room, on the other hand, everything had been left intact, as if she had deliberately ignored any trace of the elderly man in her planned escape. In the kitchen, Marcus discovered even more disturbing evidence. The refrigerator was empty except for spoiled food, suggesting that Samuel had not eaten properly in days. On the counter, he found Samuel's medications mixed together in generic containers. Impossible to know if he had received the correct doses or if Victoria had deliberately tampered with his medication. A glass of dirty water sat on the counter, along with crumbs of moldy bread. Marcus realized with horror that these were probably the last remnants of the last meal Samuel had gotten before being kicked out of the house. After getting Samuel safe with dry clothes and a hot shower, Marcus had to face the truth that terrified him. On Samuel's phone was a video recorded 3 days earlier with a title that made his blood run cold: "The Truth You Deserve to Know." Victoria's face filled the screen. But it was a woman Marcus had never seen before. The eyes that had once convinced him of her kindness now burned with pure hatred. Her delicate features were distorted by a smile of cold cruelty. She wore the Versace dress he had bought her for her last birthday, perfectly coiffed as if she were going to a social event instead of abandoning a helpless old man. "Hi Marcus," Victoria began in a sweet voice that now sounded sinister. "If you're watching this, it means you've finally found your precious daddy where I left him. I hope you enjoyed your early birthday surprise." She laughed coldly before continuing, "You can't imagine how hard it was to pretend to care for that pathetic old man for 2 years. The smell of medication, the constant tremors, the way he repeated the same stories about how hard he worked to raise you. How many times I pretended to be interested when he showed me those photos of you as a child." Marcus felt nausea rising as Victoria described sadistic methods: slightly spoiled food that caused discomfort, very hot or cold baths claimed to be therapeutic, medication given purposely at the wrong times to maximize mental confusion. The words that came out of those lips destroyed 2 years of marriage and 3 years of trust in a matter of minutes. Victoria confessed that she had never felt anything but disgust for Samuel, that she had hated every moment of caring for him, that she had prayed for him to die quickly during his bouts of illness. She only kept him for the luxurious lifestyle that Marcus provided. But the final blow was the revelation of systematic betrayal. David Carter, her business partner and best friend for 15 years, had been her lover for 2. Every business trip Marcus took had become an opportunity for Victoria to laugh behind his back with the man she trusted most in the world. "David understands what it's like to be with a real woman," Victoria continued, caressing the diamond necklace Marcus had given her last Christmas. "Not like you, always traveling, always prioritizing work and that annoying burden. Every time you left, David and I had whole weeks to ourselves. In your bed, in your house, spending your money." The video showed Victoria walking around the house as she spoke, revealing stacks of expensive suitcases in the hall. Marcus could vaguely hear Samuel crying in the background, probably already positioned in the garden while she recorded her cruel confession. "Oh, and about the money," she added casually, "thanks for the $3 million. David has connections in tax havens that make transfers surprisingly simple when you trust people too much." The video showed Victoria carrying suitcases while Samuel cried in the background, completely indifferent to his despair. She had emptied $3 million from their joint account and was already on a private jet heading for international waters when Marcus found his father. The last image was the cruelest smile Marcus had ever seen, as Victoria ironically wished good luck to the new caregiver, who would finally have to take care of her dear old man. When the video ended, Samuel looked up at his son with wisdom beyond his years. The question he asked broke Marcus's heart. He wanted to know if Victoria had never truly loved him, if all her kindness had been a lie. "Dad," Marcus said, kneeling beside the wheelchair and taking Samuel's trembling hands in his. "Nothing she said about you is true. You were never a burden to me. You are the most important person in my life." Samuel cried silently for a few minutes before he could speak. "I knew something was wrong, son. She changed after you got married. She became cold. But I thought maybe it was my fault, that I was being too demanding." "It was never your fault," Marcus replied firmly. "She deceived us both. But now it's over. She'll never come near you again." At that moment, looking at that innocent soul still trembling from cold and trauma, Marcus understood that it didn't matter what he had lost in money, trust, or pride. What mattered was the man trembling in his arms and the silent vow he made to never leave him alone again. The following weeks were the most difficult of Marcus's life. Not only did he have to manage Samuel's devastating emotional trauma, but he also had to uncover the full extent of the betrayal he had suffered. The missing $3 million was just the beginning of a series of systematic thefts that Victoria had orchestrated with professional precision. Samuel's trust fund had been completely emptied. The family jewels, heirlooms passed down through generations, had been sold to private collectors. Even confidential business documents had disappeared, likely copied and sold to competitors before the escape. A forensic audit revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. Victoria had created shell companies using stolen information, gradually transferring money to offshore accounts. She had forged Samuel's signature on legal documents, using moments of mental confusion caused by Parkinson's to obtain powers of attorney. Worse still, Marcus discovered that Victoria had systematically isolated Samuel from his few friends. Harold and Margaret, from the community center, revealed that Victoria always found excuses for Samuel not to participate in activities. "She said he was too tired or sick," Margaret said with tears in her eyes. "We began to suspect something was wrong when we stopped seeing him altogether." But the deepest wound was the psychological consequences for Samuel. The elderly man had developed a fear of being alone, panicking every time Marcus left, even to go to the supermarket. He had developed such severe separation anxiety that he followed his son to the bathroom, unable to be alone for even a few minutes. Parkinson's disease had worsened dramatically with the trauma. Samuel could no longer eat solid food, accepting only warm soups and blended vitamins. His eyes, once bright and proud, had become dull and cautious, like those of a wounded animal. Dr. James Mitchell, a geriatrician specializing in abandonment trauma, was brutally honest during the first consultation. Samuel had suffered severe abandonment trauma that required constant intensive care. Above all, Marcus had to be fully present, no more business trips, no more delegating care, no more priorities other than his father. Marcus didn't hesitate for a moment. He delegated operational management of the company to his most trusted vice president, turned his home office into headquarters, and completely revolutionized his existence. The absolute priority was not business, but Samuel's recovery. The first night after the rescue was revealing. Marcus had installed an intercom system in Samuel's room, but even so, the elderly man woke up every hour, calling for his son to make sure he was still there. "Marcus? Are you still there?" The frail voice echoed through the monitor at 2 a.m. "I'm here, Dad." "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus replied patiently, for the 5th time that night. Marcus realized he needed a different strategy. He set up a mattress on the floor of Samuel's room, keeping his hand outstretched so his father could touch it during the night. The first few weeks were an emotional ordeal. Samuel would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, terrified that his son had also disappeared while he slept. Marcus began sleeping on a mattress on the floor of his father's bedroom, his hand always extended toward the bed to reassure him with his physical presence. Samuel developed obsessive control rituals, checking dozens of times to see if all the doors were locked, if Marcus was still there, if no one could enter or leave without warning. He stopped watching television, spending days staring out the window with frightened eyes, but without making a sound. Marcus documented every small progress and every regression, learning to recognize signs of a panic attack before it degenerated. He had hired a new caregiver, Rosa, a 45-year-old woman with specific experience in cases of geriatric trauma, but above all, he had begun to be the son he had never been. Instead of delegating everything, he now personally prepared breakfast, helped Samuel with personal hygiene, and read the newspaper aloud with infinite patience. He had learned that Samuel would only calm down with heart-shaped pancakes and would only accept medication if he administered it himself. Marcus discovered that Samuel's recovery required relearning basic things that the trauma had erased. Samuel had forgotten how to operate the TV remote, how to use the phone, even how to ask for help when he needed to go to the bathroom. It's as if it stole not only our dignity, but our basic independence, Dr. Mitchell explained. Systematic abusers do this on purpose. They break the victim's ability to function autonomously. Marcus spent weeks teaching Samuel to trust his own basic needs again. They started with simple things: choosing what clothes to wear, deciding what he wanted for lunch, expressing when he felt pain or discomfort. The turning point came a month after the abandonment. Marcus was preparing dinner when he heard a small trembling voice behind him. It was Samuel breaking weeks of almost total silence to ask if he could learn to cook like he did. He wanted to prepare something special for when Marcus was sad, so he could make him smile too. At that moment, Marcus understood that his father was not just surviving the trauma, he was transforming suffering into mutual love. The affection that Victoria had never been able to give, they were finding within themselves and in their renewed relationship. But the biggest challenge was yet to come. One night, while watching Samuel timidly try to watch television for the first time in weeks, Marcus received a call that froze him completely. Attorney Martinez had received legal documents from the Cayman Islands that changed everything. Victoria wasn't content with abandoning Samuel and stealing money. Now she also wanted legal power of attorney over the elderly man's medical decisions, not to care for him, but to prevent Marcus from making any important decisions about treatment without her written consent. It was the final act of cruelty from a woman who had turned revenge into a sadistic art form. Attorney Martinez showed Marcus the documents Victoria had presented from the Cayman Islands. The strategy was diabolically clever. Instead of admitting abandonment, she claimed temporary separation due to caregiver burnout, accusing Marcus of neglecting the elderly man and even presenting falsified medical reports suggesting that Samuel was better off without him. David Carter was not only her lover, but the architect of the entire plan. As a business partner, he had provided Victoria with access to accounts, confidential information, and a strategy to steal $3 million through transfers that appeared to be authorized by Marcus himself. Back home, Samuel waited for him with the keen intelligence of the elderly who have suffered greatly, asking if that bad woman would come back to take him away. Marcus promised that no one would ever take him away. That night, he called Detective Marco Rodriguez, who specialized in international fraud. If they wanted to play dirty with lies and blackmail, he would fight with the truth. Meanwhile, his transformation from an absent businessman to a present son continued. He had learned how to bathe Samuel while maintaining his dignity, the special recipes to convince him to eat, the signs of anxiety attacks before they exploded. The elderly man slowly blossomed under his care. Samuel had started whispering a few words again. Marcus had also become his father's protector. One night, Marcus overheard them talking alone. They had to take care of my boy, tell him every day that they loved him, be strong so as not to worry him. The results of the official medical exams confirmed what Marcus already knew: Samuel was significantly better under his care. But a call from Detective Rodriguez revealed a truth about Victoria that was much more shocking than he had ever imagined. Additional Scene 13. Rodriguez had tracked Victoria through an international network of investigators. What he discovered was terrifying. She was not an amateur criminal, but a professional predator with decades of experience. "We found at least 8 previous victims in 6 countries, Rodriguez explained during a tense meeting in his office. The modus operandi is always the same. She infiltrates wealthy families with vulnerable elderly members, marries quickly, isolates the victim, then carries out systematic theft before creating situations that often result in death." Rodriguez showed Marcus a photo file of previous victims, elderly men of various nationalities, all wealthy, all dead in suspicious circumstances after Veronica stole their fortunes. Detective Rodriguez revealed that the woman Marcus had married did not exist. Victoria Santos was a false identity. Her real name was Veronica Kowalski, a serial criminal specializing in scams against wealthy elderly people. She had passports from 6 different countries and a history of systematically stealing from and abandoning families. In California, she had married a 65-year-old industrialist, disappearing with $4 million. The man had suffered a stroke after discovering her betrayal. In Nevada, she had deceived a 70-year-old widower with a fortune in real estate, selling properties before fleeing. He, too, had died of a heart attack. The most chilling discovery concerned Samuel's care. Veronica had documented 3 years of systematic abuse in her personal diary: wrong medication, cold baths, spoiled food, forced isolation. Every time Marcus traveled, she turned the house into a center of psychological torture. Samuel had witnessed some scenes, explaining recurring nightmares in recent months. Veronica's personal diary documented 2 years of perfect performance, describing with contempt how she feigned filial love and endured the presence of the disgusting old man, just to keep up appearances. The final plan was to leave him outside during a storm, hoping he would develop pneumonia so she could blame Marcus for medical negligence. Carter, having discovered Veronica's true nature, was ready to testify against her to save himself. Veronica's diary contained details that made Marcus feel nauseous. She had documented methods of psychological torture as if it were scientific research. Subject 7, Samuel, responds negatively to prolonged isolation. Temperature extremes in bathing provoke desired confusion. Food tampering creates dependency. One particularly cruel entry described, "Old man cried today when I accidentally knocked over his medication. Pretended to comfort him while planning to repeat tomorrow. Marcus calls tonight. Must maintain loving wife facade." Rodriguez explained that this level of documentation was common among sociopaths who treated their victims as experiments. She didn't see Samuel as a human being, but as an object of study to perfect future techniques. That night, Marcus looked at Samuel with new eyes. He was not just an abandoned elderly man, but a survivor who had endured 2 years with a sociopath, miraculously keeping his capacity to love intact. 18 months after that rainy night, the mansion pulsed with new life. Laughter echoed through every room, photos of Marcus and Samuel covered the walls, and the garden now housed a bench where they talked every afternoon about the happy memories Marcus had helped his father recover. The legal battle had ended in total victory. Veronica Kowalski had been arrested in the Caymans for multiple fraud, bigamy, and elder abuse. Carter, cooperating with the justice system, had allowed for the almost complete recovery of the stolen money. The court had permanently revoked all of Veronica's rights. Samuel, now 80, was completely transformed. He had channeled his experience into a passion for gardening. His flowers decorated Marcus's office. Rosa had become the daughter figure the elderly man had never had. Jorge, Rosa's 25-year-old son, was the perfect adopted grandson who visited him every weekend. The house now housed a true family united by chosen love, not blood. Marcus had kept his promise to be completely present, restructuring his work to operate mainly from home. He attended every doctor's appointment. He knew all the friends at the community center. He had learned that being rich meant being surrounded by people who loved you for who you were. During the dinner celebrating, "When we became a real family," Samuel said that the bad woman had done them a favor by leaving. Now he had a son all to himself, Rosa, who truly loved him, and he understood that the most beautiful families are those chosen with the heart. Dr. Mitchell confirmed that Samuel had not only healed, but had become stronger, more confident, and more capable of loving than many others who had never suffered. The rain no longer frightened anyone in that house. They had learned that the most beautiful rainbows are born from the most violent storms. 5 years after that night that changed everything, Marcus found himself in the mansion's garden watching a scene that filled his heart with intense joy. Samuel, now 83 years old with white hair dancing in the wind, was teaching Jorge, 30, how to plant tulip bulbs under a tree that had once witnessed despair. The two men worked together with the perfect harmony that comes between souls who have shared pain and turned it into strength. Samuel patiently explained the right depth for each bulb, while Jorge prepared the soil with steady hands, both laughing at jokes only they understood. Rosa, now 50 but with the bright smile of someone who has found her place in the world, was preparing a special snack on the terrace. She had developed a habit of documenting every happy moment of the family with photos, as if she wanted to capture happiness before it could escape again. The transformation of the Washington family had become legendary in the neighborhood and beyond. Marcus had written a book about the experience, donating all proceeds to organizations that cared for abandoned elderly people. When Love Wins had become an international bestseller, inspiring thousands of children not to abandon their elderly parents. Samuel had inherited from his son not only bright eyes, but also a determination that made him unstoppable when he decided to achieve a goal. At 83, he had already founded a small non-profit organization that raised funds for families with elderly people in need. The mansion that had once been the scene of deception and betrayal had become an open refuge where friends, neighbors, and even strangers in need knew they could find an open door and a welcoming heart. Marcus had established a foundation that used part of the property to welcome families caring for the elderly, offering psychological and financial support to children struggling to rebuild relationships with their parents. During dinner that Sunday night, a sacred tradition that no commitment could interrupt, a phone call brought everyone back to reality. It was Lawyer Martinez with news about Veronica Kowalski, now 45 and still in prison. The woman who had almost destroyed the family had tried to contact them through lawyers, claiming to have changed, found redemption through prison therapy, wanted to ask forgiveness from the elderly man she had abandoned, wanted a meeting, a chance to explain her actions and perhaps rebuild their relationship. Marcus looked at Samuel, now lucid enough to make his own decisions on sensitive issues. The elderly man thought for a long time, then spoke with a maturity that left everyone speechless. "You know, son," Samuel said calmly, placing his trembling hand on Marcus's, "during those 3 days in the rain, I had a lot of time to think. I thought about your mother, about how she taught me that forgiveness does not mean forgetting or accepting more abuse." Samuel looked out the window at the garden where he had suffered so much, but which was now blooming with new life. "That woman isn't even worth my hatred. I've already wasted too much energy being her victim. Now I just want to live in peace with my real family." Rosa, who was serving coffee, stopped to listen. Jorge, who had arrived early that Sunday, also approached. Samuel's chosen family was all there to support him. "Besides," Samuel continued with a serene smile, "what kind of example would I set for Jorge if I taught him that we should give second chances to people who tried to kill us? No, son. Some bridges must remain burned." He said they already had a complete family, built on foundations of genuine affection and mutual sacrifice. The woman who had mistreated him was now part of the past. A painful chapter, but one that was closed forever. Marcus smiled as he looked at his father, realizing that he had grown into a man of wisdom that surpassed even his most optimistic dreams. He called his lawyer and politely declined the request for a meeting, explaining that the Washington family had definitively turned the page. That same night, Marcus decided to do something he had been planning for months. He took Samuel to the garden, where the tree that had once witnessed so much suffering was now illuminated by soft lights that Jorge had installed. "Dad, I want you to see something," Marcus said, guiding the wheelchair to a small memorial he had built. It was a simple bronze plaque buried at the base of the tree, with an inscription that Samuel read aloud. "Here began our journey of healing. Where there was pain, now there is love. Where there was abandonment, now there is family. The Washington family, united forever." Samuel touched the plaque with trembling fingers, tears streaming down his face. "It's perfect, son. Now this place has new meaning." Marcus hugged his father, both looking up at the stars above the tree that had witnessed the worst and the best of humanity. That night, as he made his rounds of the house to turn off the lights and check that everyone was sleeping peacefully, Marcus stopped in front of the family photo that dominated the entrance. It showed him with Samuel, Rosa, and Jorge during their last vacation in Florida, all smiling under the golden sun of a perfect sunset. It was impossible to look at the photo and imagine that 3 of these people were not related by blood. The love that shone from their faces, the natural way they supported each other, the genuine joy they radiated, was living proof that the most authentic families are those that choose each other day after day. Before going to bed, Marcus did what he had done every night for 5 years. He quietly opened his father's bedroom door to make sure he was sleeping peacefully. Samuel slept serenely, his face relaxed and smiling even in his dreams. No longer the terrified old man who trembled in the rain, but a strong and confident man who knew he was loved unconditionally. His peaceful sleep was the most beautiful reward Marcus could imagine for all the sacrifices and sleepless nights of the previous years. As he walked to his room, Marcus thought about how strange and wonderful destiny was. Veronica Kowalski had believed she was destroying a life by abandoning Samuel in the storm, but in reality she had given him the chance to become the man and son he never knew he could be. The sound of the light rain that had begun to fall no longer brought terror to that house, but peace. They had learned that true love never abandons, that the most beautiful families are born of decisions of the heart rather than accidents of blood, and that sometimes the most terrible tragedies turn into the most luminous miracles when one has the courage to choose hope over despair. The Washington mansion slept in the quiet of the night, protected not by alarms or fences, but by the unconditional love that had transformed two wounded souls into an indestructible family. Sometimes the wrong people abandon us to make room for the right ones. Sometimes the most beautiful family is the one we choose to build with love. And sometimes all it takes is one child who decides to always be there to turn tragedy into a miracle.